Oh, yep.
Good evening, everyone. This is Lauren Bernard. I am co-president along with Benjamin Kelly of the Brookline Parents Organization, otherwise known as the BPO. Tonight, we're having an event, a town hall sort of format Q&A event with school committee members and the Deputy Superintendent of Administration and Finance, Mr. Sam Rippin. Very briefly, Mr. Rippin joined PSB this summer and is going to be here to answer questions and about the budget. Mariah Nobrega is chair of the finance subcommittee of the school committee, and Stephen Ehrenberg sits on the finance subcommittee as well. Stephen Ehrenberg was elected in 2021 and Mariah was elected to the school committee in 2020. So tonight's forum is a question and answer session about the budget. We're going to take your questions as they come in. And to begin, first of all, though, we'd like to frame the discussion. Stephen Ehrenberg has a few remarks, and then Mariah, and then we will open it up to questions. Okay, Stephen, go ahead.
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks everyone for joining tonight. So I just want to make two comments. One is that I think in the past, before I was on the school committee, I found it very confusing and frustrating to figure out how I could participate as a community member in providing feedback to the school committee in the budget process. And I think the school committee has become very intentional and proactive about how we're doing community engagement now. So this is the first in a series of events. We're hoping that this event is really about laying a factual foundation for anyone who wants to further make a public comment, urging us to spend our educational funds in one way or another. So hopefully this will give everyone the opportunity to understand, to ask the questions they need to ask, to understand the basics of the budget process for PSB, so that they can then do their advocacy at public comment. And I hope that people will follow up on this to make comments publicly at school committee meetings. The second comment I want to make is I hope everyone has a chance to take a look at the budget book that Sam Rippin, who's on this call, led the process of putting together along with Mariah and others. I just want to say, for my part, I think it is an incredibly clear, comprehensive, readable document that provides an incredible amount of transparency into how the district thinks about allocating funds in education. So I just want to start by saying thank you to Sam and to Mariah for putting this together, and to encourage anyone who hasn't had the chance to look at it yet to take a look at it either tonight or some other night before the budget is finalized. Thank you.
Lauren, should I go ahead?
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, my mute wouldn't unmute. Mariah, your turn.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for being here. It's so great to see the attendance tonight. I thought that before we went to the Q&A, it would be helpful to have a very, very, very short presentation that might provide a little bit of background and give us all sort of a level set before we get to the questions. So I'm going to pull up just a couple slides, if I might, maybe. Let's see. First off, I just want to highlight that all the materials on the budget are at the district website, and you can go to that URL/budget, and it brings you there. Let me pull these up as a presentation. I want to reiterate some of the things that Stephen said and a little bit differently. So as he said, this is really about our intent to provide a forum to ask questions and get clarifications on the budget and the budget process. There's a mandated public hearing about the budget this Thursday, the 3rd. If you can't attend to share comment, you can also email by emailing to school_committee@psbma.org. And the mandated public hearing is one of what's intended to be many opportunities to participate in the budget process. So there's the finance subcommittee meetings, there's other school committee meetings that you can provide comment, whether at school committee itself or other venues. There's advisory committee meetings where they review the budget, any other forums. And lastly, I just want to highlight and say that if you have a suggestion of where we should go, or if you want to invite us to an event, please let us know. Please invite us. We're happy to go talk to people, and we really want to be, as Stephen said, transparent and open and proactive in communication. And we can do that, especially if you collaborate with us and invite us places. So quick overview, and I just want to highlight on this slide that the links that you see here, you can access this material from that /budget link I provided earlier, but I'm just providing the references too of where these materials are. So let me just move the Zoom thing. So this is a quick overview of the total budget for public schools of Brookline. And what I want to highlight is there's an operating budget, and it has multiple sources of funds. And this first line, this 130 million and change, is the amount that's being requested from the town to support the operating budget. There are other sources of funds here, but this is the amount that's being requested from the town. Some of these are one-time funds, like the ESSER, which is federal coronavirus relief, circuit breaker funds, and staff materials fee program. These are other sources of funds that are typically recurring each year, but they don't come from the town budget itself. Of this 135.2 million, there's additional funding that gets spent through grants or through revolving funds, such as athletics, transportation. A big one is the cafeteria, or the adult ed. There's a lot of other things that are happening here. So the total PSB budget is this $148 million number. But again, the number that's being requested from the town is the $130 million number. Then people might want to know where the town's money comes from. This is the town's budget forecast, and it shows you on the top half the revenue. You can see that the town, this is FY23 we're talking about, this purple column, and there's a total revenue line here. And then they also they forecast what the total expenditures are. And I just want to highlight that you can see that in the upcoming year, as well as in the out years, every single year is projected to be a deficit, and that deficit is growing over time. So you can see that the upcoming year, when this forecast was put out about a month ago, it's about $8 million for this upcoming year, 14 million, 20 million, 28 million, 35 million. And that's roughly allocated by both the town side and the school side. And so again, there is a projected deficit. How we're going to close it is an issue. It's really, public finances are often in the structural deficit because of the way of Proposition 2.5, which many people have probably heard of, but which constrains how much the budget can grow from our property taxes, which, as you can see here, are the largest amount of our revenues. And it means that we often need to request overrides every couple of years or so. An override is basically going to the public to ask them to affirm that they want their taxes to go up more than this 2.5%. Next question, how much has the PSB budget grown over time? So you can see this is the operating budget, and it's pretty regular over time. You can see that each bump is more or less about the same, but where these monies come from actually varies over time. And you can see that, for example, from 2 years ago to this year, the blue part, which is what the amount requested from the town, was almost flat. And we were lucky that we had a large portion of this green box, which was the ESSER relief, because that allowed us to continue to be able to cover our costs. And you can see that the blue amount also varies over time, but these are all things that are changing. And particularly the green, which is coronavirus relief, you can see a little bit was spent last year, more was being spent this year, a little bit next year, but it does go away. Why is the budget request greater than what the town has allocated? The request is what the superintendent believes is the true cost of running the program that we all think a high quality educational program. The budget is refined over time, so there might be some adjustments down. But it's important that we all understand what the superintendent believes is the true cost of that. And ultimately, town meeting will be the controlling body on the budget and will vote the allocations for each department in May. So all of this is very preliminary, whether we go back to what the revenues are, what the town has allocated for the schools and everything. This is a process, and we are very early in the process right now at the end of January. And with that, I will take down the slides. Hopefully that gave people a little bit of background. and some links that they can follow up with some additional information. And we can go to, I guess, the next part of the program, Lauren.
Yep.
Thanks.
So the way this is going to work is that you're all going to raise your hands. And some of you, depending on what version of Zoom you have, you'll find the hand raising button in reactions. Otherwise, other people will show a hand on their screen. And we will do our best to call on everybody, and we will try to call on the order of people who, who raise their hand, in what order. So we'll take questions in that order. And I am going to exercise moderator's privilege only once, and I am going to ask the first question, if I may. And any of you can respond to this. And basically, Dr. Guillory in his introductory letter to the budget, talks about the budget aligning with core values, PSB's core values. And what are these values that you want this budget to reflect? If you could just expand on that a little bit and go from there. And that will be the only question I'll ask. Probably.
Do you want to take that, Stephen?
You can start, Mariah.
Thanks. So am I unmuted? Yeah. Sorry, it was asking me to unmute. You're asking what Dr. Guillory's values are, or what the values, our particular take on that, or exactly what the question is, Lauren?
That he writes, and I'll quote, "The district is sensitive to the town's fiscal short and long-term challenges and developed a budget that is in alignment with the community's expectations to provide an educational experience aligned to our core values." And he goes on to explain it, but when you were drafting this budget, you and Mr. Rippin, when you were all drafting this budget, I mean, what are the values that we want this budget to reflect?
Right. So the district has goals that it has outlined, and I'm happy to pull them up and read them aloud to people just so that they know. And these are long-term school committee goals that I'll just reflect, which is every student achieving, every student invested in learning, every student prepared for change and challenge, every educator growing professionally. So those are the, I'll say, the more constant things. Some of the things that we have been thinking about as this budget specifically gets prepared are outlined in the budget guidelines that were voted by the school committee in December, early December. And I'm happy to send around that link for people if they want to see that. It's also available at the budget link that I mentioned earlier. And it really talks about how we can think about issues that are ongoing and specific to the current time. So for example, nope, you can't, sorry, I've got a 4-year-old with me. I'm just going to give one example is, for example, continuing the summer programming from this last year that as we think about how to be able to recover from impacts of COVID and social emotional learning and academics. So that's one element of something that we were interested in being able to preserve. So there's both these longer term themes and the more immediate issues that are in front of us. Does that help, Lauren?
I can add on to that, Mariah. So as many of you probably know, PSB has 5 core values. It's high achievement for all, excellence in teaching, collaboration, respect for human difference, and educational equity. So those are the constant and overriding core values for PSB. The budget guideline document that Mariah referred to that we voted on in December was Dr. Guillory's effort at taking those core values and extending them to the current context. So fleshing them out a bit to describe what are the values that this particular budget document is looking to embody. And so maybe we could put that, maybe a follow-up to this can be, we just make, well, I'm not sure how to leave that information since there's no chat, but we'll figure it out.
I think last time when we did one of these forums, we emailed out some information that had come up during the BPO emailed out to follow up with some links. So we could do that.
My only point is to say that there is a very deliberate process of taking these core values and describing how they fit the current context for the budget. And that process concluded in December, after which the budget process began, and with the overriding guidelines that Dr. Guillory published in December.
I think I just want to add on to that too. You know, some of the things that I'm personally really concerned about now are thinking about not only sort of overall ongoing impacts mental health, but thinking about disproportionality. We've heard a lot of I'll say it, I'm just going to say it, disturbing data. We've seen a lot of disturbing data about the disproportionality, particularly among students of color, students who are English language learners, students who are disabled, and students who are low income. And so one of the focuses that certainly I, as a member of the school committee, am concerned about and want to see highlighted is where in the budget that we can invest and make investments to mitigate that disproportionality.
Yeah, and I can give another example. Like, so one of the core values, the last one, is educational equity. So I think we all know that a lot of us probably have seen at least some of the presentations on MCAS data, which indicates a very significant achievement gap between among races in Brookline. So one of the responses that Dr. Guillory made to that was to redouble our efforts at providing the resources to the Office of Educational Equity that it would need to fully implement its plan to start to tackle that problem and other related problems around racial equity issues. So specifically, the office is proposed for going from 1 full-time employee to 2.5 full-time employees. So that's just a specific example of how a core value got extended to a context-specific guideline, got embodied in the budget book.
That makes sense. So it doesn't seem like anybody has raised a hand yet. But
can everyone raise hands?
Yeah, I want to make sure. So
okay.
They should. Like I said, it should be, if you don't see it on the bottom of your screen, it should be under reactions. Oh, okay. Bridget Knightley, your turn.
Hi, can you explain where the ESSER money is being spent? I see it in the budget, but I'm just curious what it's being spent on.
I can tackle that. With respect to this year, where the budget was built on $5 million supported by the ESSER, all of ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, which is elementary, and ESSER stands for Elementary Secondary School Emergency Relief Act, just to provide some context. It largely funded, I'll give you the Universal Summer Program this past summer to recover from gaps due to the shutdown during COVID. It funded hiring school adjustment counselors, 8 of them, to deal with social emotional learning. It provided supporting all of our literacy specialists, because the town, with the lack of revenue, let me be clear, it wasn't necessarily, it more funded maintenance of effort rather than, let's say, an explosive growth in the district, because the town, due to a reduction largely in revenue from like meals taxes, rooms taxes, excise taxes, level funded the school department because that's all the town had the capacity to do so, but yet just to maintain current effort required more than level funding. And so those are areas, the large pieces of where the $5 million was to fund. Some also was planned to fund in the spring having tents, or tents were rented in order to maintain spacing and holding classes outdoors to the extent possible. For the next year, and what I want to stress is, even though the budget this year was built on utilizing all of ESSER 2 and all of ESSER 3 to the tune of over approximately $5 million, or most of ESSER 2, all of ESSER 3, through some, I would say, due to judicious management of the budget, and a little bit of good fortune, those together, we are projecting that $1 million that we thought we would spend, that will be left over, and under the rules of ESSER, those monies can be carried forward and are budgeted to be carried forward. Again, that aforementioned $1 million into FY23, and therefore is minimizing what, believe it or not, would have been a higher ask, all things being equal. I hope that answers your question, Bridget.
I just want to call out one thing you said, Sam, which is that essentially ESSER was used for maintenance of effort. There were some additional things like that school committee, and I'll call out the school adjustment counselors. That was an investment for this current year, and the universal summer program. But beyond that, the bulk of the funds are just used to continue operations because, again, of the reduced town funds.
Thank
And
you.
I'll just add on to that also, Lauren, to say the unspoken part, I think there, which is that if we were to take on recurrent expenditures using ESSER funds, that ESSER funds would eventually expire, and we would have a more onerous budget cliff than we would otherwise.
So wait, just to be clear, so the ESSER funds were used to make up for the deficit because of lack of revenue coming in?
Primarily,
More or less,
yes.
yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Somebody just texted me, I guess somebody who doesn't want to speak on camera quickly, but basically, if we could, so Sam defined what ESSER meant, but we have a few terms that some people have written they don't understand. One of those is FTE, because if you read the budget, there's reference to FTEs quite a bit.
Full-time equivalence is what FTE means, and that's different from headcount. Sorry to cut you off, Lauren, but that's a very important distinction in that in food service especially, we're carrying, although that's in revolving, no appropriation is expected nor anticipated to fund the food services department. However, you see, or I believe it's in the book, 33.27 FTE. Those are full-time equivalents. However, headcount is more in the order of 45 because most of our food services staff don't work full-time. So that's the distinction there.
Okay. There were a couple more terminology questions, but I see that Beth Gilligan has her hand raised. Why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself, Beth?
Sure. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for the great work you're doing, and to BPO for hosting this. I just have a quick question. I should probably know the answer to this, but can you give some insight as to when the last operating override that was that wasn't related to like a school construction project, but related to funding of schools, when that last was it successful, and give some history on that? I'm just curious.
Sure. So, and that was on my slides, but I was trying to be quick and I didn't actually talk about it much. But the last override was in 2018. It was successful. Typically, overrides are framed as a 3-year override. They're looking at forecasting revenues and expenses for the next 3 years. So they're sort of they are expected to hold things together for 3 years, and after that, it's something that needs to be reevaluated. So right now, this upcoming year would be, I think we're currently in year 4, and this upcoming year would be year 5. So we voted it in May 2018, And that covered fiscal years 19, 20, and 21. And then we are currently in fiscal year 22. So we didn't ask for an override, but we're in fiscal year 22. And in part, that would logically explain some of the reason that we're using, we're needing to use ESSER funding to backfill reduction of revenue, as well as what's going on with coronavirus impacting municipal revenues. And then in the upcoming year, again, we have not requested an override for the upcoming year.
Mariah, do you mind just highlighting the difference between what operating capital overrides mean for the general?
Sure. So an operating override is when it's actually for the operating budget, which is the things you do. And capital, when we are looking to fund a building, for example, we have the Driscoll. Often people call it a Driscoll, like the Driscoll override, but actually technically it's what's called a debt exclusion. So you can have an operating override, which is where you're basically overriding that Proposition 2.5 cap. That's when the override could almost be called an affirmation, like I affirm that I would like them to spend at this greater level to continue services as they are proposing. And then that is different again from the capital debt exclusion, where you're basically, it's kind of like a mortgage. If you were going to get a mortgage to construct a new house or to do a big renovation. And so the debt exclusion usually has like a kind of like your mortgage, like it has a 20 or a 25 or a 30-year term, sometimes less, but usually in that ballpark to pay for a big building project. Is that helpful, Lauren?
Yes, thank you.
And I hope I answered all of Beth's question about override timing.
You did. Thank you.
Thanks.
Somebody else wrote in with a question about could you, maybe this is for Sam, could you expand on kind of the timeline and the process by which a budget is developed? You know, like we're here tonight to look at this proposed budget, but many months went into this. And what does that timeline look like? What does that process look like before we get to this point, and perhaps after we get to this point?
That's an excellent question. And what I would begin to say is in the budget book, but I'm going to refer to it, there's a budget calendar, and not unique to Brookline, but we're here in Brookline, is a budget is there are two budgets. The budget we're focusing on for tonight is the operating budget, but the budget process really starts, and it was a bit compressed this year because of new leadership in the district, myself included. But the budget calendar really should start right after school ends. So really around July 1st is the capital budget. And so, or the capital improvement plan as it's called in Brookline. And so during July and August, what usually happens is my position, along with the building department, the director of operations, would go into all of Brookline's PSB buildings and look at conditions and look at needs and prioritize needs and estimate the cost of those needs and put together a capital improvement plan, which was done. Again, it was in a compressed way this year. And by mid-September, that is submitted to the town administrator, in this case, the deputy town administrator, Melissa Goff. And then right after that, and then that is considered along with the operating budget by the select board, ultimately by advisory and town meeting. And then again, right after that, then school starts. So the timing works very well, that principals are here year round, we're here year round. July, August is a good time. Kids aren't around, students aren't around. We can really get into buildings and update that plan. And again, for this year, it was a 6-year plan. It was F23 through F28. and of a capital improvement plan. And then school starts early September. And again, the capital budget was submitted, capital improvement plan mid-September. And around October 1st is when usually my office would work to sit with, we call them here budget managers. And there's roughly, I would say 50 or so budget managers for a district of this size. And budget managers include your 10 principals, but also your department heads, your director of food service, even though that's not paid for out of the operating budget, it still is considered, as you see in the whole budget book. And so October is when we look for our budget managers to see how things are going this year. Also, October 1st is when a first count of enrollment is by state. October 1 is reported. And so that's a moving part as well that informs the budget. And November 15th is an important date because that's when we freeze the roster. We have to, at some point, freeze the roster and look at who we have employed and assume that they're going to stay for next year and move them on step, scale, annual wage adjustment if there's a settled contract, and if not, make a provision, an allowance, so to speak, for that. And then an important thing is any vacant positions, we can't lose them. We need to query all of our budget managers to make sure we don't miss them and carry them. And then, because as you can see, or in the budget book when you see it, well over 80%, closer to 90%, 85% of our budget is personnel. And so that is very important. And then the non-personnel, it's going to those same budget managers and having them, during the month. So let me take a step back. So as we freeze the roster in mid-November, by mid-December is when we need, or by at the latest, before December break, get all requests from the budget managers submitted and reviewed through the superintendent, because we need the budget book that we're talking about was due January 14th. And given that what you see, and I'm proud and want to give credit to everybody on my business office team, especially the Office of Strategy and Planning, and Michael Chan in particular, and compiling and formatting a book of this quality and caliber in such a short period of time. So then moving forward from January 14th, moving forward from today, to sort of round out the calendar. Normally at this point, compressed or not, the calendar would roll forward like this. The superintendent presented the budget at a very high level at the school committee meeting of the 20th. We're having our forum tonight on the 30th. On the 3rd will be a formal budget hearing. The 20th also opened up public input through the school committee's website. On the 3rd, again, we'll have the public hearing. There'll be more input. On the 10th, and that's generally both charter driven by the town of Brookline. There'll be a vote by the school committee of a recommendation or to be submitted formally to the town administrator, then through him to the select board. At that point, And again, I'm new to Brookline, so please excuse me, but the dates that are important at that point is I fully expect, and there's an advisory committee meeting I'm going in March. That date is at this point, it looks like 3/16, but that is a TBD. There's a select board meeting in March.
Sam,
Yes,
I could just jump in and say, for those who are following along, a lot of what Sam is saying is listed as the budget calendar in the budget book on page 21. So the entire process is mapped out there if you want to look at the summary of what Sam is saying. Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
well, no worries. And again, I'm sensitive to time, but I don't want to shortcut this. And we're near the end of the cycle. At that point, both of those, advisory and select board, would both review the capital improvement plan, and the operating budget recommendations are made to town meeting, and that becomes the warrant that goes to town meeting floor in May. And again, TBD, there's many sessions of town meeting. I have a tentative start date of May 18th. Once our budget is adopted and voted, it then gets loaded in the accounting system, and it begins July 1st. And that's a timeline.
So it's
Thanks,
basically a
Sam.
year.
Lauren, can I just jump in again to say what's really key about the process right now? Thanks for showing how this is really a full year process, but this Thursday is really a critical opportunity for community feedback. That's the point we are in the cycle right now. So after that, the school committee will be voting on it on the budget to submit it by February 15th. So any comments that are heard on February 3rd, the school committee really has two main powers, or two only powers, right? One is to approve the budget, one is to hire and fire a superintendent. That's kind of it. So this opportunity for us to hear community feedback and incorporate it into the budget is us at the height of our powers. So I'm hoping for really informed feedback. Go ahead, Mariah.
Can I argue with you a little bit?
Yeah.
It's always important for people to provide feedback. I think that what Sam outlined so articulately is that this is a full year process and it's an iterative process. And until it gets to the May town meeting vote, it's iterating. And so I personally don't ascribe too much value to the February 3rd hearing in front of the February 10th vote that school committee is required to take by law in advance of this February 15th date that the state has set, because that number changes, the town revenues change after that intentionally, the school budget will also change. And so I don't want people to worry too much about the February 3rd date. We appreciate feedback early in the process. We appreciate feedback later in the process because this is an evolving, a living budget.
Thank you, Mariah. I want to call on Stacy Zelbo. She's had her hand up for a while. Stacy, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for this forum. I want to first say thanks. This is such a fantastic and readable and easy to understand budget. It's a lot of complexity, and I appreciate the transparency in the readability of it, and also the opportunity to participate. So thanks for everyone who pulled it together. It's a tremendous amount of work. One thing that's very clear from tonight's presentation is how important one-time money from the stimulus package was in closing the gap. And I wonder if the 43 million that's going to be made available to the town through ARPA funding is promising, if any of that will be directed to schools, and if PSB is going to be applying, because or if there are any other opportunities for a windfall from stimulus money. Thanks.
Thanks, Stacy. So you're absolutely right. And I think that some of the earlier presentation that some folks might have missed also alluded to that, which is the importance of these one-time funds and the ARP money. Now, the ARP money has a couple of different articulated uses. And one of them is called revenue replacement. And essentially revenue replacement says, yes, we know that state and local governments have lost some of their typical revenues. And so this money is meant to bridge that gap. We have heard that the town had been calculating and looking at what that value was. There's a complicated formula that the federal government had provided, and the town was working on going through developing that calculation. What we've heard most recently is that it looks like that funding could be used to, that funding is possibly available to cover the entire structural deficit. And I'll say the structural deficit is the difference between what the superintendent's request was, the 130.6 million, and what the town's allocation to the school department was. So again, that is using funds, just like we talked about earlier with Bridget's question about ESSER. It's about using one-time funds to cover ongoing operating budget deficits. So that's one use of ARP. Now, the other use of ARP is, there's several other uses, but essentially I would lump them into larger one-time projects for the most part, or other COVID-related needs. And so I think the PSB is still evaluating, and Sam, perhaps you could weigh in on this, what other requests PSB might make for ARP funds. But I think that the staff is being very conscientious that if we are to, for example, request one-time funds for something that is actually a recurring cost, then we are ultimately, once those one-time funds go away, we are exacerbating that gap, that fiscal cliff between our revenues and our expenses. And so any decision to, or any request to use funds for a recurring purpose, one-time funds for a recurring purpose, has to be thought through very carefully. And if there are other opportunities for one-time funds, then the staff will think about those and put those forward. Sam, is there anything that I missed that you would add to that? Or anyone else?
I think you captured it. What I would say is, and again, let's go back to first was the capital improvement plan. And at that point in mid-September, ARPA was known and the $43 million was known. And an expectation was that in the capital improvement plan, the part that had to do with the schools, one big part of it was over 6 years, about $18 million worth of deferred maintenance. That number was chopped up. As an example, that was the largest ask. And none of that is able to be funded because of the limited resources, or none of it is recommended to be funded out of current revenues. And the understanding is, just as an example, that maybe some of those large items, like rooftop units for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning in some of our older buildings not slated for new replacement like the Pierce, or in the process of being replaced like the Lincoln, it's an understanding that probably needs to be reiterated that we would like, or at least as I understood it, the school department would like those kind of projects to be considered for ARPA funding, as well as maybe piloting one-time piloting expenses for unique kind of programs that are not able to be funded out of current operating budgets. But again, the one thing I would say, and then I'll complete my comments, are these would all be done coordinated through the superintendent, Dr. Guillory, because what we don't want is we want every request to be in line with the goals and the guidelines that overarch. what PSB stands for. And so that would be and approved ultimately by the committee, because the capital improvement plan was approved by the full committee, as will be the operating budget.
That's right. Thank you. I did forget to mention, right, that we had put in some ARP requests through the capital plan. Stacy, did that answer the question? If you're still there.
Well, if not, oh, there you are.
Sorry, sorry. Yes, and I'd be very curious to learn more about what those pilot programs are, if that information is available somewhere.
That was what I was thinking of, is I don't think that those things have been made public. We have in capital subcommittee talked about some of the capital requests, but not some of the other pilot programs, as far as I know. Sam, as far as you know, is that correct? I see you nodding. Okay.
Yeah, that is correct.
Thank you.
Beth Gilligan, you have your hand up again. Would you like to ask another question?
Sure, just a really quick question about the strategic plan. I'm curious as to when the last one was completed, and I know Stephen talked about the powers of the school committee, and does the school committee play a large role in that? Is it more administrative? Can you give a little bit of background on that?
So I think we can talk about it briefly as far as what we know, but I also just want to, I think we mostly want to stay focused on the budget bit of it, but it is related to the budget, so that's fine. I believe we were given an update at our January 20th meeting, am I recalling correctly? That the strategic plan, so Dr. Guillory has an entire entry plan, and he took the first half of the year approximately doing dozens, like 50, 60 community interviews.
He did a dissertation, basically.
Yeah, it was right. It's like he interviewed hundreds of people at like 50 or 60 interviews to get a very comprehensive understanding of the community and sentiment and different issues. And he is going to be presenting the results of that in the spring, and that will be feeding directly into the strategic planning over the late spring and summer and ongoing into the upcoming year. And of course, the strategic plan is going to be informing the budget as well. So those things are intertwined, and I expect that we'll have a lot more clarity on what his vision is and how that will impact the budget as well. And then the school committee will be able to react to that and so forth. Stephen, did I miss anything that you think?
No, I'll just say that at the very beginning of Dr. Guillory's tenure, he said that this is the process that he foresaw for himself during his first year. This first year was really about him collecting data and presenting his strategic vision for the district, and then really starting to implement it a second year. But Mariah, do you know when the last time we had a strategic plan was for the district?
I presume it was during Andrew Bott's tenure, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
Does anyone in this call know?
We had a series of interims, of course, for anyone who doesn't know that. And so interim superintendents would not produce a strategic plan.
Yeah, that's a much awaited benefit of, I think, administrative stability, is the ability to start being strategic again instead of putting out one fire after another.
We had another question texted, or I had, actually, I'll call on Dave Gaishop first, and then I'll go back to that. Dave, you want to unmute yourself?
Happy to, Lauren. Thanks. And thanks, Mariah and Stephen and Sam for doing this tonight, and the BPO for hosting it. Given that what Mariah and Stephen and Sam walked through earlier in the slides about year to year growth, it seems pretty obvious, and I think you've told us this multiple times before, that we have, even on maintenance of effort, no new initiatives, forget everything that COVID has driven. We have cost increases every year to operate the district, keep paying people, et cetera, keep buying supplies that outstrip what our normal course revenue, absent extraordinary ESSER funds, et cetera, would be. And so any sense of what the timeline is or the process would be for a further override plan that includes PSB operating needs, because it seems pretty obvious that we had a 3-year plan override approved in 2015. We had another 3 years approved in 2018. We, had COVID not hit, presumably would have done one last year. We're going to need more. And so is that part of the longer term planning? And should we all be thinking of that as part of the longer term plan and kind of, getting comfortable with it as opposed to thinking of override as a bad word?
So thanks for your question, Dave. Yeah, I think we've alluded to this in several spots, right? There's the structural deficit that Proposition 2.5 puts us into. As you said, we had, not only did we have the 2018 override that Beth asked about earlier, but previous to that was the 2015 override. And again, as you said, we likely, or we may have had one before now. We are in year 4 going into year 5 of a 3-year override campaign, or an override plan, I should say. And so, is it reasonable to expect that we, and I would also like to point out on that long range forecast that I presented from the towns earlier, you saw that both the town and the school side were forecasting deficits going forward. So this isn't just a PSB issue, this is a structural issue that affects the entire town. I think it is reasonable to anticipate that it's likely that we're going to need an override in the upcoming year to fund so we're in fiscal year 22 right now. We're talking about the budget for fiscal year 23, which we're anticipating support from ARP funds. But then the following year, when the ARP funds will not be available, to think about that we would need to run an override during fiscal year 23 to support fiscal year 24. So yeah, I think people should think about that. And I want to sort of repeat what I said earlier, which is, and agree with what you're saying, which is override is not a bad word. Override is an affirmation of support for what the town and schools are doing, and saying, yes, whether it's continuation of effort or whether it's new programs, but whatever is being the vision that's being proposed, that it's an affirmation of that vision and not a bad word, is I think absolutely the way to think about it. The last thing I want to say about that is that, and I lost my train of thought with a child singing in the background. So maybe I'll park it for now and then I'll come back to it. But yeah, I think it is great that we should start to think about it. Oh, I know what I was going to talk about. I think it's important also for us to all acknowledge that there's been a large reduction in the number of students. And so, how that translates into change in costs is perhaps less direct than people would think. I'll give one example, just a microcosm of an example, which is if you have 21 kids in a classroom and 3 move away, how many fewer teachers do you have in that classroom teaching the kids? And the answer is there's no change in the number of teachers who are teaching in that classroom. And so, as we take that micro example and we zoom it out to an entire system, there are absolutely going to be spots where we say, oh, this we can adjust and that we can adjust, but it's not like saying, oh, well, we have reduced the number of, we've reduced our K-8 population by hundreds of students, and so there should absolutely be a large corresponding reduction in staff, just because that's not the way that classrooms work. They have, there's a certain number of staff required for the functions, and removing students doesn't let you remove a fraction thereof of these people who are student facing. But thanks for the question, Dave. I think it is good for us all to start thinking about that.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, although it's probably obvious. Fiscal year 24, barring any further injection of one-time assistance, is either going, if we don't have an override, we're looking at massive cuts. And in the interim, we need to be fiscally responsible and make sure that we're good stewards of taxpayer funds. But given the size of the structural deficit, I think we have a choice. We have, it could be a combination of cuts and override funds. It could be anywhere on the balance between cuts and requests for override. But the one-time funds are not going to last us forever. They're not even going to last us that much longer. So the sooner we grapple with this decision, I think as a town, the better off we'll be, rather than being shocked by a crisis at some point in the near future.
A question came in. Thank you, Stephen. A question came in about, again, going back to the possibility of having the American Rescue Plan funds, the ARPA funds. The question was, could those funds possibly be used for something like a temporary increase in school nursing staff? There seems to be, well, there clearly is, with the Omicron variant and the level of infection we saw, which is, fortunately declining. The student nurses have had just a tremendous workload, unmanageable workload, really. And this person wrote, would that be a considered use of these kinds of COVID relief funds? So I thought we could answer her question on air.
I'm happy to answer, and then Sam, correct me what I get wrong, which is, to the best of my knowledge, just giving the specific nursing example, there is already funds from the state that are providing additional resources for staffing for nursing. So that I just want to put out there that, and to the best of my knowledge, we are taking advantage of that. Sam, is that correct?
That is correct. It's the Community Service Health Grant, CSHS, and you're right, that is being targeted for those kind of nursing services to deal with what was mentioned by the questioner. Yeah,
thank you. And then the broader question is, could similar things like that be used for ARP? And I think that my answer is yes. And those are the kinds of things that we would be looking to PSB leadership and PSB staff to be discussing amongst themselves and bringing back to this of what are some of these shorter term needs. And I would explicitly say that ARP, the number one use for ARP funds is mitigating coronavirus impacts. And so in the case of nursing, that's a great example that you or the questioner gave about somewhere where we see clear impact. And there may be other areas too, in which it's not necessarily, we're not planning on a long-term use of those funds. It might be that we see a shorter term program that could be developed to either for specific staff support or specific student needs or so on. But we would be looking to the PSB team to propose that, to identify and propose those shorter term programs. I think we're at 8 o'clock. Are we taking more questions?
I was just going to say, we're approaching an hour, and I wanted to know if there are any final questions that people have that they haven't asked yet. Is there anything, perhaps a question that came up as Mariah or Sam or Stephen was explaining a previous question? So if anyone has a question, now would be the time. If not,
Dave Gayshuk has his hand up.
Dave, please unmute yourself.
As potentially a wrap-up question, unless others have questions, what can those of us on the call do to most help PSB and the school committee in realizing a budget that's what is needed for this year and in laying the groundwork for budget needs for the upcoming years?
Thanks. My thinking is what I said in the beginning about, offering up venues for us to talk to people. I think communication can't be underdone. We need to reach as many people and talk about some of these challenges and socialize some of the issues that we've talked about tonight about fiscal cliff and one-time versus recurring revenues and so forth, so that people understand the challenges that are that we as a school district face in balancing the needs of the district and the students and the staff with the realities of budget constraints. So I think that that's great. And then beyond that, I want to kind of skew your question to call out the fact that we have an amazing PSB leadership team that has almost entirely turned over this year. And I just want to acknowledge and recognize that we have a change in leadership from Dr. Guillory, who's our new superintendent, to Sam Rippin, who has joined us tonight and is the new deputy superintendent for administration and finance. We have Leslie Ryan Miller, who's a new Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning. We have a new HR Director, and we have a new Director of Educational Equity. And so I guess my request to the community would be to appreciate that we have what is an outstanding new era of stability and leadership in the district, and provide the staff with listen to them and hear what they are up to, so that we think about the way things have been, and maybe you haven't felt like you haven't felt heard or whatever, but we have a new team in the leadership position, and hear from them, be open to what they're saying, and be excited about what I feel is a really great new chapter in PSB.
I'd like to say something as well. I was thinking something of the opposite of what you were saying, Mariah, although I agree with what you said. I think our administration I have a lot of confidence in our administration. I think the way that Dr. Guillory has deliberately, thoughtfully, methodologically gone about obtaining information about everything across PSB has been really impressive. He really makes a point not just to visit schools and everything that goes on in schools, but to update the school committee about his visits and the fact of them and what he learns from them. So I have a lot of confidence that he's seeing things with his own eyes and making decisions based on data and complements, the anecdotal complements to that data. All of that said, we still can be getting stuff wrong. And I really would like to encourage informed advocacy and public comment. There is no way that we're going to get everything in the budget, that the administration or the school committee is going to get everything in the budget book right. And I think it's up to the community to flag, look for the programs that you know best or that you have the most faith in. If you feel that they're being under budgeted or over budgeted, although no one's going to say that, if you feel that they're being under budgeted or there's something being left out, please bring an informed case to us at the school committee and we'll listen to it. This is our chance this is acknowledging Mariah's point that this is an iterative and ongoing process. There aren't that many lengthy chunks of time during which we will have public comment followed by an opportunity to really deliberate on that comment and flow that information back into the budget document. It'll happen at Finance Subcommittee. It'll happen at subsequent public comments as well. But there's one coming up on Thursday. And I would love nothing more than to hear from passionate, informed members of the community about what we should be doing in support of specific programs. So I think that would be a great help to PSB.
I just want to follow up on that with both of you. Ben and I get a great deal of email about concerns and questions. And one of the big things is what is the best way that we can bring this to the attention of the district or to the attention of the school committee? So you're highlighting this hearing on Thursday, but what are some of, could you both expand on some of the best, you said, make yourselves heard. What are some of the best ways for people to make themselves heard?
I think Lauren, I think having civil society organizations like the BPO facilitate conversations with school committee members and administration is a great way to channel feedback. Also, they could be on specific themes. They could be on special education or literacy or some subsectoral topic that's of interest to a large group of stakeholders. I think these four are really valuable for channeling that feedback.
I'd also add and say,
I also want to put in that plug for public comment. I am hopeful that public comment will be robust and illuminating.
And beyond that, the email address school_committee@psbma.org. We all receive those. Stephen and I have recently been the author of a school committee adopted communications plan in which the vision is that everyone will read them and every writer will get a response from a member of school committee. And so I think that Stephen, your point and my point about leadership and about the public's role were very complementary. I think that the idea is that what I wanted to say is we have a new leadership and I'm excited about them. And your point is that they that we want to hear from the public. And I think that our new leadership is and our members of school committee are very, very interested in having bidirectional communication. And we want that to be a reality where we can, we are excited about this leadership. We know that they want to hear from you. We know absolutely that we want to hear from you and we want you to feel heard as well.
Well, and as Ben, I'm sure agrees with me, as you know, the BPO, that's one of the things we will continue to try to do is facilitate these kinds of conversations. But barring that, so you're saying public comment. I think what people are really looking for is two-way communication, which is not the case with public comment. But I think that's what you're alluding to, Mariah, is that you're developing some kind of new mechanism that would be by, you know.
Yep.
Great.
Right, exactly. The idea is that we will have the opportunity for, you know, we want everyone to get a response. We want there to be bilateral communication. And we also want to have more of these forums. And so I just want to say to people, BPO is not the only place where we will come talk. Invite us to your PTO meeting, invite us to your block party, invite us to your, you know, wherever people are gathering, we're happy to talk to them. So invite us places or reach out however you'd like individually as well as fine. All of our emails are first name _ last name @psbma.org, and they're on the website as well.
And I just want to echo Mariah's point about emails too. We really do read them. And the new protocol is that there's a different school committee every week responsible for responding to people's emails. Isn't to say that we all can't respond, but that you'll at least get one response. And I'll just let you know that the person designated to respond this week happens to be on the call right now, and it's neither Mariah nor myself. So if you'd like to find out, then you should email the school committee and you'll find out who's on duty.
Well, I will just ask one more time. Is there anybody who has a question? Oh, Suzanne Federspiel, Chair of the School Committee. Please unmute yourself. Nice
I
to
think
see
that's
you.
just a thumbs up that she's giving.
Oh, it's a
rather
thumbs
than
up?
Yeah.
Just
Oh, these
a
are new
thumbs up
glasses.
for-
Maybe they're not. Oh, you're right. They are. Oh, sorry about that. Well, Suzanne's on the call, so that might be a big hint. Well, I guess if nobody else has questions, we're going to wrap this up. I want to start by thanking Sam Rippin for introducing himself, for answering questions, for going through that timeline so thoughtfully. Welcome to the district. You jumped in at I think anyone who takes a new job with tremendous responsibility in a pandemic is a brave person. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure being at PSB.
Well, welcome. And Mariah and Stephen, thank you for taking the time. We know you both have young children, so Sunday nights are, you know, it's probably bedtime for somebody, but thank you for taking the time. Thank you to, we had a good turnout tonight. It looks like we have 34 participants, and thank you for sharing your evening with us. As you know, you can always email the BPO. We do read all of our emails. In the invitation you got, again, there's the link to the budget itself, the budget book. There's the link to the presentation that was made to the school committee. If if it seemed a little bit overwhelming before this event, hopefully afterwards, you'll have a sense of what to look for. Don't let its length scare you. There's lots of pages you don't need to read with, stuff that's just
Lauren, people should be reading every page.
That's 150.
Every page is filled with valuable information.
Well, it's 157 pages, but as somebody who has gone through virtually all of it, there is a lot of very valuable information in there, and don't let the number of pages scare you, because the way it's laid out is very clear. And I do urge everyone to take a look at it. And if you can't go through the presentation to the school committee has, really the most important parts of it. So thank you for attending, and we hope we are looking to do other events, other kinds of conversations, not only with school committee members, but other topics for conversation. We recently did another one on the science of reading. You can look for perhaps another literacy event soon, or something on perhaps writing. We're going to be doing, we're working up a robust schedule for the rest of the school year. So thank you. I know Ben also thanks you, and good night, and stay safe and well. Oh, Ben, you're there. You can.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you,
I can
Ben,
say
for
thank you.
hosting.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Mariah, Stephen, Sam. Thank you, Lauren, for doing the heavy lifting tonight. That's all. I don't have anything else to say.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.